Hello, Arkham Horror fans, Man from Leng here, and today on The Whisper in Darkness we are going to look at the player cards from the Miskatonic Museum, the first Mythos pack for the Dunwich Legacy cycle. We've got 13 new player cards to add to our decks, so we're going to take a look at them, see how they are, and see where the developers are going with this cycle. The first card is a Guardian card. It is Emergency Aid. It is a 2-cost event. It has an Intellect and Agility icon. It has the Insight and Science traits. Choose an investigator at your location. Heal 2 damage from that investigator or from an ally asset he or she controls. Now, this is the latest healing card that the Guardian class has received, and I think it compares fairly well to the previous cards that we've received. When you take a look at something like First Aid or Medical Texts, both cards that Roland can pick up, you know, you're paying 2 for Emergency Aid to get to heal 2 damage, whereas with First Aid you're spending 2 resources, and then you've got to take 2 more actions to heal that damage or horror. Now, First Aid is a little bit more flexible, but if you're spending 3 actions to get the same effect as 1 card, that doesn't seem like a particularly good trade for me. I know in the games that I've played, I haven't really had to do a lot of healing. Usually investigators like Zoe or Roland, they have such large health pools that I've rarely come close to needing healing of any sort. But if I was going to pack some healing, I would probably pack at least a copy of Emergency Aid. Just, you know, it's got that nice little 2 damage that could give you the room you need to make a final push during a scenario. Medical Text also suffers the same problem as First Aid does, in that you've got to take an action to put the card into play first of all, and then you've got to take 2 more actions to get that sort of healing, and it's based on a test, so there's always a chance that not only could you fail the test and fail to heal, but you could also end up doing more damage to yourself, and that's certainly not something we want to do. I'd rather pay the 2 resources and get that healing right off the bat, and be able to take other actions during my turn rather than spend a whole turn playing a card, and then doing that healing. Now, one of the nice things about Emergency Aid is it also enables you to heal 2 damage from ally assets, and this is the first card that we've seen that does that. And if we take a look at some of the allies that you might be interested in playing Emergency Aid on, certainly in the Guardian class you've got the Guard Dog and the level 2 version of the Beat Cop, which both of which you can assign damage to, and they give you some sort of benefit. In the case of the Guard Dog, you can deal a damage to an attacking enemy, and in the case of the Beat Cop, you can exhaust him as a free trigger and deal 1 damage to an enemy at your location. So if you've got a copy of Emergency Aid in your deck, you can spend that to get a little bit more utility out of your Guard Dog and Beat Cop and do a little bit more extra damage if you don't need the healing yourself. And certainly Guard Dog and Beat Cops are allies that Zoe and Roland are certainly interested in playing, so Emergency Aid doesn't end up as a dead card in your deck. Now, somebody else who might be interested in packing a copy of Emergency Aid is Pete. Ashcan Pete. Certainly Duke has 2 hit points, and Duke is so critical to Ashcan Pete's success or failure that sometimes it's nice to be able to deal a point of damage to Duke, but if the encounter deck was to deal damage to Duke, then you would want to heal that off as quickly as possible, because if Duke goes down Ashcan Pete's effectiveness drops dramatically. So having a copy of Emergency Aid around just to patch up Duke and make that final push in this scenario would be extremely handy. There's one more ally who certainly you could get the full benefit of playing Emergency Aid, and that is Brother Xavier, Pure of Spirit. He is a 5-cost asset. He costs 1 experience point. He has a willpower icon, and he's an ally. You get +1 willpower while he's in play. Brother Xavier may be assigned damage and or horror dealt to other investigators at your location. And he has a response trigger. When Brother Xavier is defeated, deal 2 damage to an enemy at your location. He has 3 health and 3 sanity, and he takes up an ally slot. Now, when I first saw this card, I wasn't sure what to make of him. I mean, he's 5 costs, so he's fairly expensive to put into play. He's not horribly expensive. It's not a 6 like Leo DeLuca or something like that. And the willpower icon, I mean, it's useful, but it's not necessarily vital to have. Certainly for Zoe, she's already got a fairly high willpower. Roland could certainly use him. I don't think an investigator like Skids would be interested in this. He's got better choices in the rogue class. But when I looked at him a little bit further, I think he's actually he's a little bit better than I initially thought, largely because when you compare him to some of the other cards that are available for experience. So you can spend Brother Xavier he's sort of like a bulletproof vest, an Elder Sign amulet, and a guard dog rolled all into one. You spend your 1 experience point for Brother Xavier, and while he costs 5, you'd have to spend 3 experience points to buy either a bulletproof vest or an Elder Sign amulet to boost your health and or sanity. Now, Brother Xavier gives you a pool of both to play with, and then if he dies, you can trigger his response to do 2 damage to an enemy at your location. Brother Xavier is also handy. I think he's slightly better than the bulletproof vest or the Elder Sign in that you can assign damage and or horror dealt to other investigators at your location to him. So if you're not taking damage or horror at that time, you can certainly, in a multiplayer game, get a little bit more extra utility out of him. And so I think he's, for 1 experience point, he's certainly an interesting option to consider compared to spending, if you want a set of bulletproof vests or Elder Sign amulets, you're going to be spending 6 versus 2 for Brother Xavier. So I certainly think Brother Xavier is, experience point wise, he's at the right price, and having that large pool of 3 health and 3 sanity gives Roland and Zoe a little bit of a cushion they can work with. And if you need to defeat him to do an extra 2 points of damage, that's just icing on the cake. So I think I'm going to be definitely giving this guy a try to see how he works out. The next card in the pack is I've Got a Plan. It is a seeker event. It costs 3. It has an intellect and fight icon. It has the insight and tactics traits. And it has the text Fight. This attack uses intellect. You deal +1 damage for this attack for each clue you have, maximum +3 damage. And I think the flavor text is some of the best we've had in the game so far. That's the worst plan I've ever heard. Well, what are we waiting for? Now, I've gone back and forth on this card since I first saw it. Initially I thought, I looked at Rex, who has certainly no problems gathering clues, and Rex with Mylan out, or some of the other story assets that are available to investigators now, you can get him up to a 5 intellect or a 6 intellect pretty easily. If you've got Myelin and a hyper awareness, you can boost that even higher. And you get +1 damage for each clue, so Rex certainly has no problem gaining clues. So that's, this guy could be hitting for 4. But then I sort of got to thinking, I'm not sure if that's really I'm not sure if that's a great card to be packing it. I mean, having played a lot of multiplayer, usually your decks are a little bit more specialized, and packing things like I've Got a Plan aren't really necessary. Now, I haven't played a lot of Seeker solo, and that's probably where this card would fit the best. I mean, for Seekers, if you're playing a solo Seeker, having access to up to 4 damage for an attack is great, especially if you're in boss fights. Obviously, you can compare I've Got a Plan to things like Mind Over Matter. I've seen some Rex decks on Arkham DB, which is a great resource for players out there if you're looking for deck ideas or just want to see what other people are building. I've seen a lot of Rex decks packing Dynamite Blast, and I certainly think this could replace Dynamite Blast in those decks. It's slightly cheaper. It does have a test, which Dynamite Blast doesn't have. It's got a slightly better icon spread in the intellect icon, so you could always pitch it if necessary. And you do lose a little bit of the utility that you can't really use it on enemies that are at other locations. But if you've got to hit one at the location you're at, it's going to do the job for you. I'm not sure how it compares to Mind Over Matter. I mean, with Mind Over Matter, you get the bonus. You get to use your intellect in exchange of your fight or agility for the entire until the end of the round. So that gives you, if you need to fight, you can attack 3 times. You maybe get 3 damage that way, which is roughly equal to what you would get with I've Got a Plan. And it does afford you that extra versatility in that if you want to evade enemies instead, you can play it for the agility icon instead, or use your agility instead, sorry. So overall, I think I'm certainly going to play around with this card. Put it in a couple decks. I might even have to give Solo Seeker a try to see how it stacks up and whether it gives you that damage they need to push it over the top. I mean, somebody like Daisy, she has access to Shriveling, which I think is probably a more consistent damage option for her. But adding a couple I've Got a Plan to a deck with her would certainly give her that little bit extra damage she could need. When you look at the monsters that you're going to be facing, typically, you're not going to be using I've Got a Plan to kill your acolytes. You want to save it for things like the Relentless Dark Young in Devour Below. It's great against the Rougarou and Curse of the Rougarou. If you're playing solo, man, you could hit that thing for 4 damage before it runs away. That makes it fairly easy to take down. I mean, you would need 5 clues in order to engage it and do that amount of damage, but it would certainly make that much easier to take down. And if you're in the House Always Wins, and you're facing against something like the Conglomeration of Spheres, I've Got a Plan certainly helps you knock that thing down quite a bit quicker, and it has the added advantage of not being a melee weapon that you're going to have to discard anyway. So I think it's got a place, and it's going to help Seekers, and maybe Roland would want to pack it, or some of those other investigators from the Dunwich Legacy expansion that are currently using dynamite blasts to shore up their offensive potential. The next card in the pack is Pathfinder. It is a 3-cost Seeker asset. It costs 1 experience point. It has an agility icon. It has the talent trait. It has the free trigger during your turn. If you are not engaged with any enemies, exhaust Pathfinder. Move to a connecting location. So the first thing to note about this card is the free reaction trigger for free move as long as you're not engaged with any enemies. I think in multiplayer this is, there have been many instances playing the first 3 scenarios from the Dunwich Legacy cycle that playing with Rex have always wanted that, just that one extra move would make all the difference, be able to get him in a better position to spend those clues to advance your act or to bring out extra locations. And so this is going to enable you to do that. Certainly in multiplayer, your Seekers shouldn't be engaged with enemies all that often, so this is going to be a free move every turn, which, between Rex's free clue gathering ability and Daisy's ability to get an extra action using her tomes, that's 2 extra actions right there. 3 cost is a little bit expensive, but certainly if you end up with Myelin on the table, it shouldn't be too hard to pay for that. Certainly compared to other cards like Shortcut that we saw in the Dunwich Legacy box. If you need a permanent form of Shortcut, this is the way to go. Certainly Shortcut has been, in the decks that I've played it's been very helpful in getting to those locations quicker and ultimately advancing your act quicker. So I'm all in favor of free movement. That's action advantage is so important in this game that having access to that free move could make all the difference. The next card in the pack is Contraband. It's the first rogue card. It is a 4-cost event. It has a willpower and intellect icon. It has the supply and illicit traits. Choose an asset controlled by an investigator at your location. Double the number of ammo or supply tokens on that asset. Now I've gone back and forth on this card since I first saw it, and I'm still not sure what to think about it. I don't play rogues as often as some of the other classes, and so it's a little bit difficult for me to judge. Certainly, if you look at the card and what it does, for 4 cost you're basically getting another 45 automatic or 8 shots in a 45 automatic, which I think in any given scenario is going to be more than enough to keep you in ammo. You'll have enough ammo to last the entire scenario. Now for me, the problem with this card is that the 4 cost, I know that rogues are a little bit wealthier than the other classes, but 4 cost seems extremely high considering you've got extra ammunition, which costs 2. It does cost an experience, but you are getting 3 ammo tokens with extra ammunition, so it's almost giving you the same amount as Contraband, and it costs less. And it's certainly a card that Skids has access to. If Jenny, say, wants to boost her weapons, she'd have to go with Contraband. So I'm just not sure whether Skids would be interested in this. Certainly, the other problem with this is the doubling of the number of ammo. So if you draw this early and you don't have a weapon or an asset that uses supply tokens. This is going to be a dead card. If you draw this too late and you've already taken a couple shots with your 45 your automatic, you're going to be paying 4 for maybe 1 or 2 extra ammo instead of the full 4. So I'm not sure how crazy I am about that. I mean, whether it would be better if just to install a new 45 automatic at that point if you draw it. Now, Contraband is better than extra ammunition in that it can add supply tokens to assets that use them. Now, it's important to note here that this is only supply tokens. It doesn't affect charges and stuff like that, so you can't use this to boost your shriveling or any of those spells. It's strictly supply tokens. So for cards like First Aid or Liquid Courage or Flashlight, you can double the number of supply tokens. Now that looks great, but again, you're spending four resources on that, and that's a pretty hefty chunk of change. If you draw it late, you're going to be faced with perhaps you only have 1 supply left on your First Aid, or 1 supply left on your Liquid Courage, and at that point it would be almost better just to pack a second Liquid Courage, which costs you 1, and you get your 4 supply tokens back. Same with Flashlight. You're spending 2 to get 3, so I'm going to have to play around with this card a little bit and see how it works out. I mean, I just get the feeling that math isn't my strong suit, but I get the feeling that if I draw this card, I'm just not going to want to play it. I'm going to have other things that I'm going to want to spend my resources on. Certainly, while Jenny might like it, Jenny is going to be typically spending her resources on her asset talents and not cards like this. So I'm going to have to play with it, but right now I just get the feeling that if I draw this into my hand, I'm not going to want to play it. The next card in the pack is Adaptable. It is an asset that costs 1 experience. It's a talent, and it's a permanent, which means it starts in play at the beginning of the game. And it says, in between each game of a campaign, you may swap up to 2 level 0 cards out of your deck in exchange for an equal number of level 0 cards. You must still follow all deck building rules for your investigator. Again, I don't play Rogue as much as I play some of the other classes, so it's a little difficult for me to assess this card. Certainly for 1 experience point, that's, the effect isn't bad. I mean, especially if you're using it a lot, typically it costs you 1 experience point per card, so this would add up to be quite a savings if you're doing a lot of swapping out of cards throughout the game. Now, I just don't know how often you're going to be using that ability. Certainly as more scenario packs come out and more rogue cards come out throughout the course of they don't have to be rogue cards at all. As more cards come out, you may want to add them to your deck, and this will give you a way to do that cheaply. So for 1 experience, I certainly don't think it's a bad upgrade. With the card pool being as small as it is right now, I think the decks you're building are going to be pretty good out of the gate, and I think only if you got, if FFG releases some really bomb card later in the cycle that you just need to get in your deck, this will give you a way to do it. So certainly for 1 XP, I'd be willing to throw a copy in there, and it also reduces the number of cards in your deck by 1. So it if you need to draw your other cards, this could help you a little bit there. The next card in the pack is Delve Too Deep. It is a mystic event. It costs 1. It has the Insight trait. In player order, each investigator draws 1 card from the top of the encounter deck. Then add Delve Too Deep to the victory display, and it is worth 1 victory point. So I believe this is our first investigator card that is worth victory points. I would certainly consider packing this in solo, just for, drawing another card off the encounter deck in solo isn't particularly dangerous. I can almost guarantee I will never play this card in my multiplayer Mystic decks. I really can't see myself wanting to draw 4 extra encounter cards off the top of a deck during a game just to get 1 experience point. Certainly, if you had 2 of these in your deck, that's 8 extra cards, and some of these encounter decks are so slim you're basically going to burn through them that much quicker, and I just can't see myself wanting to do that. That's like adding, going through 2 extra turns of encounter cards if you're playing 4-player. So I just, I don't. It's hard to judge. I mean, it really depends how starved you are for experience, whether you'll want this card or not. If you find that you just need that 1 extra experience to get the cards that you need, then maybe you consider packing this. But in past, certainly in the core set campaign, I had more experience than I knew what to do with, and was sort of looking for things to burn it on in the end, even swapping out level 0 cards in my deck to use some of it up. So that may change in the Dunwich cycle. Each of the scenarios seems to provide less experience than the core set scenarios do. So maybe grabbing that little bit extra experience every game will really add up over the course of an 8 scenario campaign. But right now I think this one's going to stay in the box for me, and I'll get cards that do a little bit more, because certainly I could see myself drawing this and being at a point in the scenario where I really don't want to play this. So top decking this at an inopportune time, I would just feel sort of ripped off. So I think this one's going to stay in the box for me. The next card in the pack is Song of the Dead. It is a 2-cost asset for Mystics. It costs 2 experience points. It has the willpower trait. It is a it has a willpower icon. It has the spell and song traits, so you can tutor this up with your arcane initiate. It uses 5 charges, and it has the action spend 1 charge, fight. This attack uses willpower instead of fight. You get +1 willpower for this attack. If a skull symbol is revealed during this attack deals +2 damage, and it takes up an arcane slot. So this is yet another spell that the Mystics can use for fighting. It's accessible to all of, Daisy can grab this if she wants. Certainly Agnes and Jim also have access to it. It does give you a bit of it does give you that +1 willpower bonus when you attack. But when you compare it to Shriveling, I think the real power of Shriveling is that it gives you that +1 damage. Now, you do have the risk of taking horror with Shriveling, but investigators like Daisy and Agnes, or even Jim, a horror is no big deal. I would much rather take the horror and get +1 damage out of it. then no chance. I mean, you look at Song of the Dead, the attack will do +2 damage, but the chance of that, I looked it up, the probability of drawing a skull token from a standard chaos bag is only 12.5%, so almost 90% of the time you're just hitting for 1 damage with this, and I just don't see that as being particularly efficient, even though it's cheaper than Shriveling. I'd rather, and it's even got a better icon than Shriveling. I mean, I'd much rather have the willpower icon than the fight icon, but you know, that extra damage output that Shriveling does is just so key for investigators that I just don't see myself taking Shriveling out of my deck to replace it with Song of the Dead anytime soon. Now, that said, if the investigators get some more ways of manipulating the chaos bag, perhaps, you know, there might be a card that comes down the line at some point that allows investigators to add extra skull tokens to the bag, this card suddenly becomes, you know, a lot more interesting. I mean, the odds of drawing one, though, are so small that I just can't see myself swapping Shriveling out for this yet. But perhaps FFG has plans for the Chaos Bag that we don't know yet, and give us ways to either manipulate the results of the bag or add more skulls to the bag. This card could become more interesting. The first Survivor card in the pack is a 2-cost event with 2 fight icons. This is Oops. It's fast, and play after you fail a skill test by 2 or less while attacking an enemy engaged with you. Deal this attack's damage to a different enemy at your location. So this card it's interesting. I mean, I love the art. I love sort of the theme of being able to hit. You know, you miss the main attack, but you end up taking out something else instead. I think that's great. Now, I'm not sure how practical that is in gameplay terms, though. It's not my experience that there are an awful lot of enemies around to be hitting in case you miss. Certainly it seems in the games I've played, especially multiplayer, you're engaging there might be 1 or 2 enemies at your location at any one time. So if you miss hitting another one, it might come in handy. I could certainly see packing this card solely for the 2 combat icons. Certainly somebody like Ashcan Pete using Duke to attack, suddenly you've got a 6. You've got a 6 fight. That would come in handy. I could see somebody like Zoe packing this again just for the 2 fight icons would come in handy. But as for the opportunity to use this, I mean, first you've got to fail the skill test, which is bad enough, and then there's got to be another enemy around in order to hit it. So again, you could pack it for the 2 fight icons, and if you miss, and if you happen to have another enemy around, you could play it for that ability. But sometimes this is just going to be a dead card in your hand, and so we'll have to wait and see. Try it out, see how it works. I don't see a lot of locations having a ton of enemies around, so perhaps that will change in future scenarios. The next card is Fire Extinguisher. It is a 2-cost asset. It costs 1 experience. It has an agility icon. It has the item, tool, and melee traits. It has the action Fight. You get +1 fight for this attack. And it has the action Exile Fire Extinguisher. Evade. You get +3 agility for this test. If you are successful, evade each other enemy engaged with you as well. And it takes up a hand slot. So Exile is the new mechanic that was introduced in Dunwich Legacy, where you remove the card from your deck permanently. So Fire Extinguisher, if you're using it for its second action, is a one-shot opportunity, and so you're basically spending experience to buy this card, and then if you use it, you're going to have to pay 1 experience to get it back into your deck for the next game. So it's the first ability, the fight, you get +1 fight for this attack. I mean, it really leaves me feeling pretty meh. I mean, survivors have fire axe in their class, so if you're looking for, and that can give you a lot more attack and a lot more damage if you play your resources right. So not having any extra damage on this, just sort of, I really don't feel like paying 2 for something that isn't going to do any extra damage. As for the evade ability, I'm not too sure. I tend to kill enemies rather than evade them. So if you compare Fire Extinguisher to some of the cards that are already available, Cunning Distraction from the core set, for example, it's an evade that you automatically evade all enemies at your location, not just enemies engaged with you. It's a little more expensive, of course, at 5 cost, but that will evade all enemies at the location, whereas the Fire Extinguisher gives you +3 to your test, and it only evades the enemies engaged with you as well. So if you're engaged with a lot of 1, 2, 3 enemies, I don't think I've ever seen a game yet where I've been engaged with more than 2 enemies. Yeah, I don't see the value in that. I mean, you look at all Survival Instinct from the core set. It's a skill with an agility icon. If you succeed at the evasion attempt, you immediately disengage from each other enemy engaged with you and move to a connecting location. So again, it's a different take on this whole evading mechanic. It gives you a +1, so it's, Fire Extinguisher is slightly better in that sense. But this will get you out of, you will evade all the enemies that are engaged with you if you're successful at your survival, if you play Survival Instincts, and you get to move away. So again, I don't do a lot of evading. Sometimes it's handy to lock an enemy down, but +3, I mean, I don't know, would Wendy want this to get that +3? I'm just not sure. I think there are better cards to spend your experience on. Certainly Lucky would be is typically one of the first cards that investigators pick up with their first experience points. And having to constantly pay 1 to get this Fire Extinguisher, I just don't see that as being a particularly good value. Excuse me. If experience is a little bit tighter during the Dunwich Legacy cycle, who knows whether you're going to want to spend that, and maybe there could very well be scenarios where that experience is just going to be wasted. So I think this one's going to stay in the box for me, and I'll look at other options when evading, if I need to evade. The next card in the pack is Flare. It is a 2-cost event for survivors. It costs 1 experience, and it has a wild icon. It has the tactics. It's a tactics card, and the text reads, either choose 1, fight, you get +3 fight and deal +2 damage for this attack. Exile Flare, or search the top 9 cards of any investigator's deck, for an ally asset and put it into play under your control. Then exile Flare, shuffle the search deck. So if you're looking to grief your friends during a multiplayer game, here's one way to do it. If you can find a way to pack this and delve too deep in your deck, you could have the good start. You've got the great start of a really good grief deck going to cause all sorts of problems to everybody. Again, this is the second exile card that we're seeing in this pack after Fire Extinguisher. Now this one I think is a little bit more appealing, largely because you are getting +3 fight and +2 damage, so you're hitting for 3, and I mean +3 is a great addition to a fight check. Certainly that. I'm not sure it makes Wendy that much better, but who else could use it? I don't know. Agnes, well, she's going to be using her spells. I mean, maybe Ashcan Pete would use this in a pinch. That would push him up to 5 and 3 damage, which, depending on the enemy, isn't bad. Now the second ability is quite interesting, to search the top 9 cards of any investigator's deck for an ally asset and put it into play. Now I'm not too sure when you would want to search any other investigator's deck other than your own. Usually you're putting allies into your own deck because they benefit your strategy, and grabbing somebody else's ally doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Like certainly if you're playing, I'm trying to think of a good example of, say if you're playing Ashcan Pete, I mean you're not going to be pulling Arcane Initiates out of somebody else's deck. And the chance of actually getting that in a typical investigator deck, you're starting with 28 cards in your deck. So if you happen to draw Flare in your opening hand, in the top 9 cards, you've got a 54.76% chance of, say, if you've got 2 allies in your deck, you've got a 56% chance of, about 55% chance of pulling one out. So your odds are only slightly better than 50-50 of this actually going off. So it's certainly not a guarantee. So again, I think this card, of the 2 exile cards in this pack, this one is slightly more interesting to me because it does give you that extra damage, and it does give you that utility of being able to search for an ally if you really, really need it. And the chance is not super high, but there is a chance. So, and it does have a wild icon, so that's certainly helpful. And it only costs 1 XP. So, again, depending on, whether you feel like burning this card and having to repurchase it every game, you may want to consider this, especially if you've got an ally that you're really relying on. There are 2 neutral cards in the pack, and we're going to look at them together because they basically essentially do, one is the flip side of the other one. They are Smoking Pipe and Painkillers. They both cost 1. They are both neutral assets, and they both have willpower icons. They are both items with 3 supplies, and they have the free reaction trigger: spend 1 supply, exhaust Smoking Pipe, and take 1 damage, heal 1 horror. And Painkillers does the exact same thing, except you take 1 horror and heal 1 damage. Now I've been pretty meh about a lot of the healing cards in this game so far because they require you to take so many extra actions to get any benefit out of them. And I often find when I'm playing I simply don't have the extra actions to spare. Now these ones are these change that on your head a bit because it is a free trigger. I mean, you have to exhaust the smoking pipe and spend a supply, but you can convert horror into damage and vice versa. So for somebody like Roland, for example, I mean, he's got such a large health pool that I would have no problem slapping this on him. And, you know, over the next 3 turns, you've got 3 horror. You're going to take 3 damage, but you're going to heal 3 horror, which, you know, should be more than enough to keep you in the game. Investigators like Daisy, who have the reverse situation where they have higher horror totals than health, Painkillers is certainly a good option. I think in the case of smoking pipe, healing that horror damage is pretty. It's one of the easiest ways to do it. Certainly, you compare it to something like Fearless from the core set, which is a skill card, so you need to pass a willpower skill check in order to heal a horror. Jim's Trumpet from the Dunwich Legacy, you're having to draw skull tokens in order to heal horror. First Aid from the core set, again, you're having to spend an action to play the card and then another action to heal a horror. In this case, you just take an action to play the card and you get to heal the horror for free. Liquid Courage and Clarity of Mind, 2 other cards that were introduced in Dunwich Legacy that heal horror, also require you to take action, so you will have to play the card and then you get you have to take an action to heal the horror. So in a game where, you know, action efficiency and action economy is so important, I think having cards like Smoking Pipe and Painkillers are you know, a huge boon, because you can spend that free trigger, heal that 1 horror, and then you've got you can spend another you've got 2 more free actions to heal 2 horror for damage. You know, you can take that damage and get rid of that horror. So I'm definitely going to be looking at Smoking Pipe and Painkillers in future investigator decks. They just seem too good to refuse. Well, that wraps up my review of the player cards from the Miskatonic University Mythos pack. Do you agree, disagree with what I've said here? Leave me a comment down below, or you can drop me a line via email. I'm always interested to hear what other players think of the cards, and whether you've found any combos or whatnot that you can use to eke out a little bit more advantage out of them. How are they working in your decks? Let me know. Leave me a comment down below. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up, and or you can drop me a line. You can reach me at manfromleng@gmail.com. That's manfromleng@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at manfromleng. Thanks very much, and I'll hope you tune in until next time. We should have the Essex Express, Essex County Express expansion pack coming out soon, so I'm looking forward to taking a look at that. Until next time, happy investigating.